the Toronto Star. I'm Sabah Itazaz, and this matters. Annamie Paul made Canadian history twice by being elected the first Black leader of a federal political party, and a year later with these words that were felt by every exhausted racialized woman who knows exactly what she's talking about.
What I didn't realize at the time is that I was breaking a glass ceiling that was going to fall on my head and leave a lot of shards of glass that I was going to have to crawl over throughout my time as a leader. And when I arrived at that debate stage, I had crawled over that glass. I was spitting up blood, but I was determined to be there.
This is a familiar story. A Black woman worn down and beleaguered from within her own ranks, finally stepping down as a leader after another electoral defeat and facing intense public scrutiny. Green Party leader Annamie Paul's resignation comes after her defeat in her own Toronto Centre riding during these elections, but it was a long time coming. With the party's own internal report leaked earlier this year revealing the extent of systemic racism within, many say that she was set up to fail. It was built into the system from the onset. So let's unpack this a little. What happened to Annamie Paul? Is it the business of politics as usual when a strong, outspoken woman lets go of her platform and her potential? Or does this run deeper and reflect Canada's real problem with racial double standards? I'm joined by Ifill. She's a freelance columnist for The Hill Times, co-host of the Bad and Bitchy podcast, and founder of equity and inclusion consultancy, Not in My Color. Hi, Erica. Thanks for joining the podcast. I'm so glad you're doing this.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. I'm going to start off with recent developments. Erica, what do you make of the irony of a Black Jewish woman at the helm of a party whose own internal report acknowledged a big problem with systemic racism? What does that say to you about how all of this came about, how this unraveled, and about Annamie's long-expected decision to step down?
Well, actually, I'm glad how you framed that question, because it actually made me realize something, and it just in a timing sense. So the internal report came out, the Globe and Mail's reporting on the internal report came out late August. The internal report was floating around in July. How long do you think this has been a problem? I'm guessing before Paul was elected. Well, why do you think she was elected? Well, I think this is a lot of window dressing to cover up a really big systemic problem that the Green Party has.
A long-standing one.
It's the glass cliff, right? It is electing Paul to fix the problems only when she points out that there are problems, then she becomes the enemy, right? And they oust her.
It's a catch-22.
Exactly. That's literally how it works. And it works for Black women in positions of power. And, I've heard South Asian women say the same thing, right? That basically we're brought in for window dressing to make the institution that is self-combusting because of its own racism, because its own systemic discrimination. And we're brought in to basically put a face to the problem. And it seems like that's what the Green Party did, which is gross.
A microcosm of the larger issue that we will be talking about. I do want to talk about her press conference from a few days ago, because I have to admit I had a very visceral reaction to it. Like, I really felt it, especially where she talks about breaking the glass ceiling, having to crawl over the shards, spitting up blood. Why do you think she spoke with such sharp, raw, and vivid imagery, like straight up talk?
Metaphors are so effective, aren't they? Are they not like an effective literary tool? Because I'm thinking about what she's talking about is the struggle. And the struggle is that Black women, especially in leadership in this country, get no support, are consistently attacked, are undermined, excluded from emails, meetings, etc., and are then gaslit into believing that either it was a performance issue or somehow it was their fault. Because performance is the only way that the institution, it's the only defense they have. So they will always attack performance. And so I tweeted in, I think, July or something, that they're coming for her. And that really, they're going to, I use the word kneecap. I have the Sopranos on the brain. I'm sorry. But, she won't be able to, quote unquote, perform like she was, quote unquote, expected to. But she came into this with a deficit, and a deficit created by the party, in my opinion, to undermine her. And that's the way it works.
And you spoke about how metaphors are effective. And this phrase in particular, like I want to talk about how this sort of resounds and is familiar to so many racialized women. And I was doing some research on stuff that you wrote, and I saw that you actually used this very metaphor to talk about this issue early on before this press conference. Yes, I do my research thoroughly.
I don't remember which one that is. Do you know what I wrote?
I think it was along the same context about racialized women in toxic work cultures and just especially in leadership positions. So basically, on a very public level, this kind of speaks to the stories of the many Black and racialized women who, like you said, are expected to perform at their very best. Those standards are there despite dealing with harassment, with microaggressions, with systemic issues. And this is not a standard that is applied to their white counterparts. Do you agree with that assessment?
I would agree with that. Now, Annamie Paul has to prove that she's even supposed to be there. And one of the quotes she said was, "I also felt a responsibility to show that someone like me could get as far as I could." Well, that says it all, doesn't it? I think that says it all.
I think so. That sums it up. And just seeing what she said and her gradual progression towards exhaustion as she dealt with all of this internal fighting and microaggressions, as you say, and resistance within the Greens while campaigning at the same time. But we're also seeing these conversations from her critics about her mistakes, so to speak. What does this say about the expectations on Black and racialized women in leadership positions?
That we're just supposed to shut up and take it. That's it. That this is the expectation. This is the job. If you can't handle it, get out. You're not the right fit. We need to talk about this right fit phrasing. Okay.
Talk about it.
Because that is a way to shield every company, okay, from discrimination accusations, because it's very discriminatory. I would like everybody out there in business side to know that when you're recruiting, this is why I consult, okay? Is that when you're recruiting, saying that, saying to a racialized person, saying to an LGBTQ2S+ person, saying to a person with disabilities, et cetera, that you're not the right fit, it's discriminatory.
We'll be right back. I want to talk a little bit more about what the critics are saying, because this is something we hear a lot in my field of journalism as well when it comes to women being targeted in a certain way. Her critics are saying this might have nothing to do with race or misogynoir. It was a performance issue. And it's often repeated about everyone in politics needing to have a thick skin and that maybe she wasn't able to develop it. What are your thoughts or response to that?
If you think a Black woman who got to that stage does not have a thick skin, then you really shouldn't be talking. You shouldn't have an opinion, okay? Because that broken glass that she got to, like that she talked about, is exactly what we walk on bare feet all the time, every day, every time we get up. Black women in leadership also get more complaints against them from their subordinates. It's from womb to tomb, right? You're a Black kid in school, you get disciplined more harshly, you're punished more harshly, you're not recognized for your contributions as you get to adult stage or something like that, or you're just not the right fit. You know what I mean?
That seems to fit here.
It's just a circle. I guess what I'm saying is, like, I could be clearer. I think that when we say run, women, run, stop it. Just stop saying that. Because what happens is we tell women, go run, go join politics. And we give them no support. And we make no room for them. I think what the politicos and the politicians, whoever, Canadian media needs to ask itself is, how does the structure have to change to make room?
That's a perfect segue into my next question, because I wanted to ask you, Annamie was kind of this lone figure. Why don't we see enough Black females in political leadership in this country, even compared to our neighbors? And also, does this also have something to do with how we talk about racism and race-related issues in this country, or rather how we don't talk about them?
Well, we don't talk about them. We pretend they don't happen, and then we sneer at the US as though they're doing something worse than we are. They're not. To be honest, a lot of the racial policies that you hear about in the US were duplicated in Canada, historically and today. So, I mean, to not know US racial history, it's not that separate from Canada's. It's not the same, but it's similar. And so I guess, what do we expect as this country? What kind of country do we want? Do we want a country with equity and justice? Or do we want a country where there's always a subclass, and that subclass is according to race? Because right now, what we have in this country is plantation politics. And plantation politics is where everybody with power is white, and everybody underneath them is, the lower you go down the chain, become darker and darker and darker skinned. And that very much is a reality in this country. And as much as we want to pretend that isn't it, it is what it is.
And what are the internal impacts of these things? Talk to me a little bit about the emotional and psychological burden racialized women in particular carry while navigating positions of power, or just navigating workplaces, to be honest.
Mental health struggles. Racism is a mental health issue. Misogynoir is a mental health issue. When Bell has its annual mental health, Bell Let's Talk, nobody talks about that. Where is that? The mental health toll is enormous. And I'm really, really impressed at how strong Annamie Paul is, taking all those attacks throughout the spring and then coming into an election, a federal election, her first, battered and bruised. I mean, think about the strength that takes. So all those people who are like, ooh, well, she should grow a thick skin. I mean, white men whine about the simplest things every day. They do. The whining. Like, I just, like, I'm just like, they could never walk in her shoes and survive. I'll tell you that.
Some different standards being applied here. Erica, what needs to be done so that women of color are not treated this way, so they can thrive and be included in the political process and in other sectors where they should be in leadership roles? What do we do?
That sounds like solutions, and solutions cost money. In consulting land, they do.
Let's talk about how we can, what actions or what supports would be critical.
I'm joking, but not really. Like, here's the thing. I think that you'll never get away from having to dig into the structural issues. I wrote a piece for Refinery 29 on the Black vote, and I cite it quite a bit recently because, number one, I've just wanted to write it for so long, and you never know which outlet is actually going to think it's important enough to print. So I was like totally stoked about it. But what I found was that in our communities, Black women are doing the work, the organizing, some of the grassroots political work, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not translating to political power or in the political structure. And that tells me there are impediments there. So how do you get to being elected, let's say? Well, you need funds. So you need a fundraiser. You need a community to vouch for you. You need to have relationships across community lines. You need support from your party in terms of campaign management, communications, all of those things. So you need a machine, like you need a team, right? But you also need connections in certain places. What I find is that one of the impediments is riding associations. So the riding associations, who are pretty powerful in the nomination process and in the campaign process are responsible for a lot of decision making. They're all white and they usually skew older. So they don't even get what's going on.
Not on Twitter.
No. Who? They probably call it the Twitter. Yes, I'm looking at you. Anyway, so what happens is that Black women enter these spaces, and these spaces end up being very toxic for us and very uninviting. And they don't listen to us. Also, running a campaign is expensive. It's even more expensive if you think about it in an opportunity cost context. You have to take time off work. You have to then invest more money to go to conferences, to meet those people, to make those connections. And you have to do it on short notice sometimes. And so what happens is you don't have that flexibility. So the point being that it's not that we don't have the quote unquote skill set. It's that the systems in place are literally designed to keep us out, period. And we can see that with the Green Party. And this is what happens. Because I don't know going forward what the Green Party could ever say to women. How are they going to get women to vote for them at this point? Because I talked to a lot of women and they were very impressed with Paul. We all felt that, no matter what race or marginal, whatever, or non-marginal or whatever. We all felt that. So what does the Green Party say to women going forward?
That's a very good question to end this on. This has been such an illuminating and cathartic conversation. So thank you so much for your time,
Erica.
Cathartic,
actually. It's been great.
It's been great.
Yeah.
Yes. And there was so much more to unpack. So hope to have you on again soon.
Well, I'm here. You know where to find me.
Digitally.
Yes.
Take care, Erica. Thank you.
Bye.
I was talking to Erica Ifill, a columnist for The Hill Times, co-host of the Bad and Bitchy podcast, and founder of equity and inclusion consultancy, Not in My Color. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. I'm your host, Sabai Tazaz. The This Matters team is Adrian Chung, Brian Bradley, JP Pozo, Matt Hearn, Morgan Bucknick, Raju Muther, and Sean Pattenton. Our music is by So-Called, Mike DeAngelis, and Sean Pattenton. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com/subscribingmatters. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.